evaluation and learning partner for the Community Renewal Learning Lifting Neighbourhoods Together programme. So we've been working with Community Renewal in Edinburgh and Building Futures East in Walker. It's a really exciting journey. As I say, we're very much at the midpoint of the minute. So the minute we're discussing the initial learning from the evaluation, I'll come back over time and we'll look at how it progresses as we move forward. And so as John said, evaluation and learning is really important elements as part of the Lifting Neighbourhoods Together programme. And as Gary talked about in his last presentation, learning is a key aspect of anyone who's taken part in systems approaches. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to briefly introduce why evaluation is important. Hopefully not counting too much of what Gary's just said, but I'm trying to reinforce and support evaluation as part of that learning process. And then I'm going to briefly outline the evaluation framework that we've developed for the Lifting Neighbourhoods Together programme and do a shameless plug for my workshop session, workshop session, the next set of work streams. And then finally, I'm going to provide some initial learning that we've identified from the first 2 years of Neighbourhoods Together. In part, this will replicate bits from what John said earlier, but again, it'll be a different insight as well that we've taken from the evaluation. So, why is evaluation important? What is it? I think ultimately, evaluation is a sort of systematic way to get a deep down understanding of a programme. It involves systematically collecting information and analysing information about the design, implementation and the results that emerge. It shouldn't be, and I think this is where I was trying to support what Gary said, it shouldn't be something to be scared of. It's not about performance management. It involves looking at what's been produced, but it's not just about bean counting. That's not what you want. Its purpose, yes, it's about making judgments, it's about understanding, but these are to benefit and to improve the programme. What we want to do is try and improve the effectiveness of the programme by understanding how it's been delivered, what's worked well, what's worked less well, what works for certain people, what works for other people, what's the circumstances that it works well in, and how does context challenge the delivery of a programme. And what we're trying to do is identify from that the learning which can then improve the design and implementation. It's not being about scared of failure, as something which Gary just said as well. It's also about obviously understanding the delivery and the achievements of the programme, to focus on what difference it's made, and then to justify the case for further investment and replication. So again, it's about identifying the learning and making a case. Actually, this seems to work well. This should be taken and rolled out. I'm not going to get too much into evaluation theory, be pleased, but broadly, there's two types of evaluation. Really, you need to be doing both to get the most of it, particularly in terms of learning. You need to do formative evaluation to understand need. So what's the need for a particular intervention program, whatever, and what the delivery process is. So that's part of formative evaluation. And then the summative side to look at what difference it's made and understand the impacts. I thought it was useful just to draw a few examples of what should be part of a good evaluation. And I think hopefully you'll see there's some bits of what we've done as part of Lifting Neighbourhoods Together evaluation. So the first of all, it should be tailored to the programme that you're working for, and the evaluation questions which you're looking at. So for us, the Lifting Neighbourhoods Together is very much about a systems thinking approach. So that needs to be built in and at the core of what we're doing. And also understanding that it's a complex delivery system. Yes, Community Renewal and Building Futures East are there, but there are also a whole range of partners. So I can't remember who said it yesterday, but very much that outcomes don't belong to an individual organisation. They belong to the collective, and actually they're owned by the individual themselves who achieves the outcomes. The programme an evaluation needs to be inclusive, so it needs to take account of a diverse set of viewpoints. Don't just go to the people who are going to be positive and tell you what you want to know. You've got to ask those difficult questions, find out what works well for people. It might be that actually experience of people who benefit from the service is positive, but actually the delivery by services themselves might be having mixed views. And I think you need to understand that, particularly if you're going to roll something out in the future. you need to be honest as well, not just trying to promote what works really well. You have to say, actually, this worked really well, but this worked less well, and actually it didn't work out as expected. We had to change, and it's by doing that that's where you gain the most learning. There has to be an element of replicability there, so it's using methods that are rigorous. But again, the key thing is it's got to be to the given circumstances. If I should really underline that bit, so understanding that actually, well, in evaluation speak, yes, random control trials are the gold standard, but ultimately they're not always appropriate. So, for example, for something like Lifting Neighbourhoods Together, which is a system change initiative, because of the complexity, random control trials are not really appropriate at all. So, again, you've got to make sure it's replicable for the circumstances. And again, the most important thing, it's got to be informative to help people provide evidence and learning to help them meet their needs. So it's a key part of an evaluation is to understand who the stakeholders are and what they're going to want to take from it. So moving on now to Lifting Neighbourhoods Together evaluation. So again, this is going to be quite a quick look over how we're doing the evaluation. Broadly speaking, on this slide, it just shows the evaluation questions we're looking at. So they've got one question around, to what extent can we say that systems change has been been achieved? In many ways, that's the key, the immediate outcome which we'll see from Lifting Neighbourhoods Together. It's about actually how we're changing the system, and from that it'll affect beneficiaries and participants in the area, residents, the neighbours, neighbourhoods, and then we'll see, well, are there outcomes further down the line? So can we say, to what extent can we say that the neighbourhood is being lifted out of poverty? And again, so we've identified an outcomes framework to develop that, and I'll just show you that briefly in a minute. But again, it tries to capture a broad range of different outcomes across a whole different range of measures. We'll look at the economic case, because obviously it's important if you are looking for future funding. Well, does it make sense financially? So the amount of money it costs to run the program, or this type of approach, and what are the financial benefits we might expect to see? And finally, obviously, a lot of Lifting Neighbourhoods is about the sort of replicability of it. So what we want to understand is, to what extent have we learned about how and whether the program could be actually replicated in different circumstances, and how it might need to be adapted, or actually you might need to start with a set of actually explorations first before you actually start moving on to the program. So very briefly about the framework. So and again, this is trying to embed it in actual delivery of the program itself. It's when we built the approach on a systems-based theory of change, and that's taking account of the fact it's obviously designed out of the systems theory. I'm not going to go too much into that. That's the focus of the workshop, which I will be doing next. But basically what we did was we developed a maturity matrix to try and understand the sort of the key features of systems change, what's important, and try and understand how a system moves through a range of processes on the way to becoming more effective and efficient. But yeah, it'll be the feature of my workshop later on. It'd be great for as many people to come along as possible. We've developed a beneficiary and neighbourhood level outcomes, and this is very much a sort of multi-dimensional impact and outcome measurement tool to try and judge the sort of success of Lifting Neighbourhoods Together in lifting people out of poverty. We try to build it around subsystems. So this is quite a messy slide, but it just shows some core indicators which we've developed. And hopefully from this you can see that actually, well, we've chosen kind of like hard outcomes which you'd expect big commissioners to want you to measure, for example, unemployment rates and how people move into employment. But it also includes a range of other factors in the tool, some of which are shown here, which are about actually, well, how people have made progression towards work, have they completed various tasks. So I think as sort of Gary, picking up on Gary earlier, it's almost like the outcomes, so the outputs on the way to moving into employment, for example. So have you completed a CV? How confident do you feel at taking part in an interview, for example? I'm not going to go into these bits into too much detail, but there's quite a significant piece of work we're looking at trying to attribute parts of change that we identify towards Lifting Neighbourhoods Together. And again, for this, we're using a multi-method approach, and that's very much based on the idea that standard, more scientific methods, for example, random controlled trial, are just not appropriate. So what we've done is we tried to combine various pieces of evidence in a sort of stories of change, so we can understand the sort of the contribution of lifting neighbourhoods together, and this different way of working to what difference is made for the people in the area. And finally, we're looking at the sort of the economic case, and that'll be adopting a standard social cost benefit analysis approach, drawing on sort of the harder outcomes, but also trying to understand benefits in terms of well-being, which is obviously a core benefit which people will experience. So now moving on to probably the most important and interesting bit, actually, what learning has emerged of these first few years. Obviously, it's important to point out, can't be stressed enough, we're only 2 years in, and what a 2 years it's been. It's not been easy, obviously, with COVID, and I'll come on to that and a few other points which I'll make now. So it's important to know that this is not the final outcomes of what's been achieved. This is not final learning. There will be further learning that emerges. So on this slide, what I've tried to do is actually just start off almost like from the baseline assessment, which we did, was just to justify the need for something like lifting neighbourhoods together and our similar approaches which look at systems work. And the first thing we noticed across a whole range of different measures and metrics is deprivation and poverty in both neighbourhoods was very widespread, and it was deep-rooted in both neighbourhoods, cutting across a whole range of policy domains. So the subsystems in which lifting neighbourhoods together is working. Obvious point there is poverty is very multi-dimensional. It's often interrelated. So people who have got poor homes have often got poor health. They've got poor health, so therefore they're most affected their educational attainment, and then obviously affected their likelihood of finding employment. So you need to cut across all these different subdomains to actually support someone out of poverty or deprivation, or whatever term you want to use. Speaking to both communities, it's very clear that both communities, and this is something that Gary picked up a minute ago, feel forgotten about. And they've gone through various cycles of these sort of interventions which have come in, delivered pretty much, almost entirely, in a sort of linear way of working. It's funding which the organisations have been given to deliver a particular intervention in a particular way, in a particular subdomain. And that had failed to deliver because it had been probably too narrow in its focus, or if it had worked, often it had been cut because of various budget cuts over the last 10, 15 years. Having said that, local people, it was from the people we spoke to, it was quite, and the stakeholders as well, it was clear they had considerable skills, knowledge and experience, and had a willingness to actually to help people lift themselves out of poverty. However, this is often just really latent. It was just hidden underneath, behind doors, because there was nothing there. People lacked this sort of the agency to do it, didn't have the infrastructure. I think the fact that lifting neighbourhoods together has got this quite strong community building aspect is actually quite key as well. It's not just about services, it's about embracing and empowering the community to do their own work. And finally, I think actually it's coming at a time when actually a range of stakeholders, and that I mean by policymakers, commentators, academics, are sort of embracing this need to actually do things differently. Partly as a response to austerity, but other things as well. Actually realizing that what we've been doing for years and years and years hasn't worked. So therefore, we need to do something differently. And there seems to be quite a lot of willingness for this kind of lifting neighbourhoods together approach, which was more proactive. It was more integrated services, and it's about enabling people to access and navigate around services and be a bit more proactive as well. So it's not just reactive services. You're trying to get in there early and support people before crisis happens. So first I'm going to start off with a couple of slides looking at sort of the things we've drawn out that have gone really well over the last couple of years. And I think the first thing is from a very early stage, it kind of relates to the points on the previous slide. Lifting Neighbourhoods Together has been very successful in gaining a sort of profile and buy-in from a range of senior strategic stakeholders. And I think it's important to come senior because I'll reflect on that later on. The clearest example of this is in Edinburgh, with the programme getting name checked in the influential Edinburgh Poverty Commission report, Just Capital, Actions to End Poverty in Edinburgh. But also, I guess, it's the range of people who are willing to engage and talk about to the programme, and the evaluation itself as well. Really happy just to engage with us because they're quite keen to know and understand about the programme. COVID-19, although lots of bad things happened because of COVID, actually, it also provided some good things for Lifting Neighbourhoods Together. In a sort of crew, that's not a silly thing to be saying. Because the workers in the two neighbourhoods were able to gain key worker status, the programme was able to remain open, and the teams were able to do some important work contributing to the neighbourhood response. And the key bits there were almost like just starting to demonstrate how something like Lifting Neighbourhoods Together teams could be focal points to people and could help signpost them, link the neighbourhoods to other services. And by knocking on doors, you're engaging someone who would probably just remain hidden behind that door. They could also then signpost them to a range of services which they need to access, helping them navigate the whole myriad web. Obviously, going back to John's slide earlier with the ranger map, help people navigate through the maze. And secondly, what they were able to do is, because they were quite a larger organisation in the area, with quite a bit of capacity, they were able to provide the infrastructure to underpin the community response. And a key example there was able to access funding, which smaller organisations wouldn't have been able to access. So Lifting Neighbourhoods Together, they could access Community Renewal, could access the funding, and then distribute it amongst the more local organisations to empower that sort of community response. And a range of kind of other aspects about sort of the Lifting Neighbourhoods Together approach have been seen to be really positive. We've talked about some of these over the last couple of days. Obviously, this is quite established and generally embedded with staff an effective way of engaging individuals in a deep root level conversations, listening conversations approach. Obviously, it's built on previous work by the organisation, but really embedding that in the teams, in the neighbourhoods, where there's this focus on knocking on doors, and engaging people to understand their experiences, their assets, their needs, obviously really important. Starting to see co-location of services, particularly in Magnum and Bigham. Obviously, co-location, it does not guarantee co-working and working together, but it's a step in the right direction. So I think the fact that we're starting to see this co-location is very much positive. Started to successfully impact on the sort of procurement policy. Procurement is a massively important aspect of systems change and systems thinking approaches, as we've talked about over the last couple of days. There's starting to see examples where this has been successful because of Lifting Neighbourhoods Together. So example of an employment program or package of employment services where there's, for example, there's targets have been taken out, and they kind of trust that this will work through. There's also examples, and particularly in Walker, where Lifting Neighbourhoods Together have coordinated a sort of multi-agency working. So instead, I think that what they did is identified various individuals who were very much sort of bouncing around services, that engage with a service, they'd help them with a particular issue, they'd send them back home, another issue would flare up. And so what the Lifting Neighbourhoods Together team did there is they sort of brought these services together around the individual, rather than the individual going to the organisations, and that's starting to show benefits. I think obviously then helps to get buy-in going further down the line. And finally, just to say, I guess what they've started to do is deliver and support community initiatives. So providing funding to empower communities to actually start helping themselves. I guess some challenges, obviously got to include COVID-19. The pandemic definitely hasn't helped ultimately lifting neighbourhoods together. The timing of pandemic and the start of the program aligned, which meant that it's just really challenging and drawn out the sort of establishment of the program in the neighbourhoods. It also prompted a little bit, quite a number of the time donors to be withdrawn from the program, as services recognise actually that we just need to bring back our resources just to deliver what we need to deliver. It's often through necessity. Stay-at-home guidance, obviously, and rules and social distancing don't really work for a program which is very much about interaction and contact. But also services that you want to bring services to people. If services are actually going more remote, it doesn't work as well. I guess the other thing to say is that obviously supporting people out of poverty infinitely more challenging in a world where we've got COVID-19, because actually the sort of the scale of the problem is just so much greater. And obviously now moving into the current situation where verge of recessions, high cost of living, income's not increasing as much as prices, it's obviously getting infinitely more harder to achieve these level of outcomes. Obviously a point around data sharing as well. The challenge in actually identifying who's most in need has really affected the sort of the delivery of the program. There's a lot of hopes and aspirations about what could be done there, but at the minute it's obviously to challenge the delivery. In terms of learning, so to draw out some of the lessons, I guess it's been said quite a number of times, I think, sort of achieving systems change and systems-based approaches is hard. It's not easy. It's something which is actually, you need to, particularly one which delivers long-lasting improvements to neighbourhoods. It's complex. It needs to be viewed as a long-term process. Showing certain things work, learning something doesn't work, changing, adapting, moving forward gradually. You need to bring in stakeholders who are often embedded in their own ways of working. You need to change procurement. It's a obviously long process. I think there's a point of learning for lifting neighbourhoods together, which I think has definitely been they've taken on over the last few years. Is actually, it needs a kind of deeper network of collaborators from across the organisations, but also through organisations. It can't just be the leader. The leader's one level. Obviously, but a key challenge is actually getting all the way down through the organisation and to the front line, where obviously people on the front line are obviously delivering to what services they've been procured to deliver. They've been working a certain way for quite a long time, so certain working patterns can become quite ingrained. Lifting neighbourhoods together in the delivery model is very different, so therefore it just takes time to build that through, and can just need example projects. Don't use the word pilots, but these are like prototypes which demonstrate how it can work. And again, it's sort of related to this sort of lifting neighbourhoods together. It raises tensions between that kind of work based around more generalists who go in and engage people and try and support them and navigate the system, versus quite specialist and linear delivery models. I think it's probably a battle which has obviously gone on throughout time, but it is something which it definitely lifts its head when you're looking at a program like this. And again, it's often prompted probably by procurement and historical ways of working. Procurement promotes competition. It promotes people fighting for outcomes. So we need a change there. Obviously not all procurement, but the majority. So it just needs that change. So just to round off, just obviously to provide some next steps to evaluation. We've, like the delivery of the program itself, we don't want to fix ourselves to the method. So we're going to continue to refine the approach. Obviously, we're just going to evaluate the progress in lifting neighbourhoods together in terms of where the systems change is achieved, how the reorganised resources and services to support residents, how we reorganise services around individuals in a more holistic, sustainable, integrated way, and then trying to assess the impact of the programme on whether it's lifting neighbourhood out of poverty. Obviously, with the current challenge, it's probably going to be more about how it promotes people to be lifting out of poverty. So, excellent. Wrap it up there.